Hello and welcome to the BALLE podcast. Our guest today is 2011-2012 BALLE Fellow Anthony Flaccavento. Anthony is an organic farmer and has been working on community, environmental, and economic development in Central Appalachia for the past 25 years. He founded SCALE, Sequestering Carbon, Accelerating Local Economies, which is a private consulting business dedicated to catalyzing and supporting ecologically healthy regional economies and food systems. He works with community leaders, farmers, foundations, economic development agencies, and others in Appalachia and around the country. Anthony was a candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives in 2012, and he is a former National Food and Society Policy Fellow at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, as well as a Leadership for a Changing World Award winner from the Ford Foundation. Anthony, thanks for joining us.
Sure, I'm glad to be part of the conversation.
So you recently attended an event that was arranged by our friends at the American Sustainable Business Council with the USDA in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
On paper, this thing looked pretty amazing. Lots of great sessions, lots of great folks speaking there. Did it live up to the hype?
Well, it was really quite a great opportunity. We had the second in command at USDA, the Deputy Secretary, Krista Harden, who's new to that position. She replaced Kathleen Merrigan just recently. Kathleen Merrigan, who did an outstanding job in support of organic farmers and the local food system movement, stepped back, went back into the private sector, and Ms. Harden took her place. She was the most senior person there. She was there for the first hour or so of the meeting. And one thing I was struck by, I didn't know her going in, but she was extraordinarily attentive to everybody who was speaking. And in fact, the folks at ASBC, the American Sustainable Business Council, after introductions, asked me to go first. And right off the bat, she was tuning in pretty closely to the things I had to say, and then things that other folks shared as well.
So you actually had an opportunity to present at the meeting?
Yes. So the ASBC organized a range of people representing a pretty broad base of interests related to food and farming and health and nutrition. There was representatives from migrant workers and Latina farm workers, from folks involved with agricultural cooperatives and other co-ops, and of course a lot of farm, water quality, conservation, and environmental interests as well. I'm not quite sure why Richard Idland from ASBC gave me the nod to go first, but he did, and I started to talk a little bit about how almost 15 years ago we started working in Appalachian, Virginia, and Tennessee to help tobacco farmers transition to organic produce and free-range eggs and other kind of healthy, sustainable crops. And it definitely got the attention of Deputy Secretary Harden. She was quite fascinated by it. She's from Georgia herself, so she knows a little something about farming in the Southeast, and she knows something about conservative farmers who grow things like tobacco or peanuts or cotton and things like that. And so I think to her, it seemed to strike a chord, the notion that you could build a system that would entice and enable tobacco farmers to shift from that crop to something that local folks can consume, and it's good for them and the environment. It definitely caught her attention.
And she was receptive to efforts to maybe facilitate that conversion and support it?
As a matter of fact, when I told the story, and we all spoke very briefly because there was a lot of us in the room and many USDA people that were also speaking, I just cut to the chase with the description of how we reached out to those farmers, the markets that we built, which were primarily supermarket customers, and then the infrastructure that it took, what a lot of folks now call food hubs. Back then we didn't call it a food hub, to link those farmers to those markets. So it wasn't just a matter of training them to grow a different crop, but the primary thing, and I said that to her, was that the markets that we secured provided the incentive for the farmers to make the shift. They could actually make more money raising a healthy set of crops, a diverse range of crops, than they had been able to make previously raising tobacco. And she immediately started asking me questions about whether USDA programs helped with that, whether there was anything that had facilitated that. And what I explained to her was that when we got it going, actually there were no USDA programs to help with that transition or to help with the farmers markets that we were launching at the same time. We're in a very rural area with towns that are extraordinarily small, where the big cities have 40,000 people in them. So back when we started farmers markets as well as the food hub, there really was no chatter about local foods, about healthy eating. And so USDA at that time, we're talking about the late 90s and 2000, didn't have a whole lot to support it. What I explained to the deputy secretary was that once we actually got it up and running, which we did with other sources of support, then USDA came in and was actually quite helpful, both with our farmers market efforts to build several markets in the region and with the food hub. So ultimately, USDA was quite helpful, and she was glad to hear that. But we kind of bootstrapped it on our own in the beginning, which is one of the things that you notice if you've been at this for a while, like I have, is that what most people had to do on their own 15 or 20 years ago, there's now, I wouldn't say adequate, but I would say considerably more support from USDA as well as cooperative extension and state agencies today than there was, a generation ago.
I recently read about in New Mexico, there's what they were calling the first Native American food hub that was development of which was supported by a USDA grant. Is that something that seems like a sort of a part of their arsenal of tools and techniques that they're using around the country now?
Food hubs have really caught on. When we launched ours, and we have a name for it, we call it Appalachian Harvest. It's actually a trademarked brand name for the produce and eggs that are sold under, but that's the name we use to refer to the whole initiative. We were one of the first in the country, I believe. We were certainly the first in the Southeast and Appalachia, and it took several years. We probably made every mistake in the book as we learned how to manage, a pretty tough business, a nonprofit organization running a business with high stakes, where you're trying to convince farmers to try something new, and you want to be able to help them succeed. And then you're trying to convince buyers, big supermarket buyers, college and university, food service buyers, and others, that you will be able to deliver the product. And so it's really pretty high stakes. And when we started it, we didn't have a whole lot to fall back on, either financial support from foundations or public agencies, or just other people's experience. We were one of the early ones. So now there's a body of experience. It's still a challenge. It hasn't gotten easy. It's just that a lot more people have tried it, have built successful hubs. Some have failed, but there's a body of experience now in rural areas, in big cities, from coast to coast, north and south, that just wasn't there when we started. And that body of experience is really helping the ones that are new now, that are just getting going, to maybe avoid some of the pitfalls and mistakes that some of us early in the game had to make in order to learn. My consulting business, Scaling, one of the main things I do is working with food hubs, either folks considering doing it, wanting a feasibility study, or folks who've been doing it and are struggling to make it work. And what I've noticed in working with groups is the amazing diversity of local food, healthy food, local economy initiatives that are emerging. I'm right now working with people in New York City, in the South Bronx and Harlem. Just finished working with folks there. About to start working with people in Minneapolis, Minnesota, way up north, as well as folks in Appalachia and the Arkansas Delta. So it's really emerging all over the country. And it isn't a magic bullet. It isn't going to solve all of our health and nutrition or obesity problems, but it is, when it's done right, creating really good markets for farmers. Generally, it encourages sustainable and organic practices, and it's opening the door for a wider range of the population to eat better.
There were some other really fascinating topics on the agenda at that meeting: access to credit and technical assistance for beginning and disadvantaged farmers, rural and community economic development initiatives, efforts to address climate change and promote renewables. Did you meet anybody new or come across anyone that was doing some other especially interesting work who was able to present or share at that meeting as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I said, it was a rich array of folks. And there were people there who were working primarily with new and beginning farmers. I do a lot of work with young farmers on my own organic farm as well as in my consulting work. It's not my primary focus, but one thing you notice is that nowadays there's really quite a growing body of young people in their late teens to early 30s, who are quite interested in farming or food-based ventures, and that's a wonderful turnaround from 15 or 20 years ago when young people few of them seemed interested. So there was folks talking about that, and we came to understand that the Beginning Farmer and Rancher program that USDA launched a couple of farm bills ago got a pretty significant boost in the most recent farm bill. So there was some discussion of that, quite a bit of discussion about economic development. And again, I'll say that farming and food businesses by themselves don't build healthy economies, but I've noticed in my own area and all over the country that they're often a critical first step. A strong farmers market and a food hub then create all kinds of other economic opportunities. They tend to help with revitalizing downtowns, and that brings in other sorts of businesses. It makes young people want to stay, as the food economy is sometimes followed by the arts and culture economy. And so there was discussion of how food and farming is often a critical first step in establishing or reestablishing a more diverse local economy. And again, USDA has sort of slowly but surely, I want to give them credit, but not too much credit, they've slowly but surely been increasing their support for these kinds of initiatives. There was also a gentleman there who was a senior advisor on organic food and farming for USDA, a delightful and very humble man who's been at it for many years, and he spoke about a number of the organic programs. You know, probably one of the most interesting things that I learned at this meeting, Andrew, was actually from the USDA officials, which was that they announced, the day we were there, they announced the formation of 7 regional climate change hubs around the country. USDA is taking the lead among federal agencies, it seems to me, in recognizing climate change as something that is not only real, but something that's impacting farmers. It's going to impact the food system. And these hubs, which go from the Northwest in Oregon to the Southwest in New Mexico and across into North Carolina, it's the closest one to me, and up into the Northeast. These 7 hubs, they intend to be focal points for research and experimentation and community partnerships that will help both reduce climate change by helping stimulate renewables and clean energy initiatives and improved soil management and forestry practices to sequester carbon, and at the same time help farmers and local communities adapt to climate change, because the reality is that even if we started cutting our emissions sharply, we would still have a lot of changes we're looking at coming forward. So I think a lot of us had not heard of it before this meeting, and we got to speak to the folks who are heading up this regional climate change hub initiative, and that was some of the best news I've heard in a while, that they're making that recognition and hopefully going to put a little bit of resources into it.
When will they be rolling that out?
Pretty much immediately, in terms of the program has been launched. How long it will take to establish the hubs is unknown. And of course, not only with that program, but with all of the programs, there's programs around helping low-income people get access to healthy food. There's increases in programs for fruit and vegetables and better eating. That whole array of programs has been passed in the Farm Bill. Now comes the tricky part, which is the appropriations. And as Kathy Ozer from the Family Farm group pointed out, that's where the devil is in the details, because oftentimes a program will be passed, but the appropriations don't back it up. And so I think anybody who cares about healthy foods and farming as well as climate change, this is the time to let their legislators know that the money needs to be put into these programs. It's interesting. Some of us have been working on USDA programs for 20 years or so. And what we've seen over that time is a slow but steady improvement in the attention given to organic farming, to local food systems, to healthy food access for low-income communities, and now to climate change. But even after 20 years of improvement, if you add all those programs up, there's still a very, very, very small percentage of USDA's funding compared to things like support going to commodities and big agriculture. So we hope that the funding that has been committed will in fact be appropriated. That's the key at this point.
So you have observed that average age of farmers is maybe coming down. Younger people are getting more interested in starting careers in farming or agriculture in the recent years?
Well, I don't know if the average age of farming is coming down. The body of farmers is fairly large compared to the number of young people getting involved. So we may not yet be seeing the average age coming down. What we are seeing is a definite surge in young people interning, doing apprenticeships, getting onto incubator farms like Jamie Haley, another BALLE Fellows, her incubator in Charleston, South Carolina. In many, many different ways, young people are now getting involved in farming. They're also getting involved in local economy initiatives. If you look around at who's starting the restaurants and the bakeries and the bike businesses and the sustainability, it's a high percentage of young people. So if that trend continues for 20 years or so, then the average age of farmers and entrepreneurs will indeed come down. I think it's probably too new at this point to have impacted the average age. But those of us who've been at it for a while, it's really quite thrilling to look around the room when you go to an ag conference or you show up at the farmer's market on Saturday morning with your truck of produce and see that at my age of 56, I'm starting to be one of the older people in the group, and there's a lot of young folks who are there beside me. That's really quite exciting. So, but it's new, and those young people need support. They need training and mentoring and technical assistance. They need access to markets. They need affordable capital. And so whether or not it is sustained long enough to actually impact the average age of farming, it's too soon to tell, but I'm hopeful about it.
Did the USDA discuss any specific initiatives that they have to encourage young people to get involved in farming?
Yeah, they have an array of programs under what they call the Beginning Farmer and Rancher program. And so this is both for people doing produce or grains or things like that, as well as people in livestock. And I'll have to say also that at least in Appalachia, where we have a lot more rolling hills and pasture than we have flat land for crops, the number of young people who are getting into farming seems to be particularly high around ranching, basically small livestock, sheep and goats and beef cattle and poultry. So these programs through the Beginning Farmer and Rancher program, they provide a number of different things. Some of them provide training and technical assistance. Some of them help a community organization or a farmer co-op set up a mentoring program. Some of them provide low-cost capital so that a new farmer can get a low-interest loan or, in some cases, a small grant to help. So there's a lot of different things you have to do. But again, ultimately, it really is an array of things. It's no one thing. You need all of those things plus good access to market. And those markets have to be willing to pay. I mean, that's something that I experience week in and week out as a farmer. You don't want to have organic produce or free-range eggs or healthy meats that are so expensive that ordinary people can't afford them. And certainly that's not the way we price our things. But on the other hand, as a people, as a society, we've become so accustomed to food being cheap. We pay a little less than 10% of our household income on food on average, that we can't continue that either. Young people won't stay in farming if they have to work. I mean, farming is wonderful. I love farming, but it's tough. You know, you're out there in the blazing heat, and you're out there in the cold and rain and snow and everything else. And it's a wonderful life, but you don't want to do it and continually lose money. And so it ultimately comes down to average consumers understanding enough about what it takes to farm that they're willing to pay a little bit more for good, healthy food.
How do you feel the USDA in general, and maybe even this administration and the federal government as a whole right now in the current climate, how do you feel like they are on localist issues in general? Do you feel like they've been an asset or a hindrance to localist work around the country? Do you leave meetings like this or engagements with the federal bureaucracy feeling more or less hopeful?
It's all relative, Andrew. Again, I've been at it long enough to have a perspective on what it used to be like, not only within USDA, but within the land-grant universities. In our neck of the woods, it's places like Virginia Tech and the University of Kentucky and University of Tennessee. When I look back to when I launched Appalachian Sustainable Development and I started farming, we had basically no support from anybody. I mean, really, it was literally we could not find anybody at the land grants or in cooperative extension who either knew or was willing to share knowledge about anything to do with sustainable farming or food and agriculture. There was really no local food movement. So those institutions in USDA used to be pretty much entirely focused on very large farmers, agribusiness, most people would call it, and on a small slice of crops within everything that's grown, corn and soybeans and wheat and cotton and sugar and a few of the commodity crops. If you look back to what it was then and look at what it is now in USDA and those related entities, it's a world of difference better. Is it what it should be? No way. It's just not. It's still somewhere between a couple of pennies and a nickel out of every dollar of USDA funding goes to the full range of these localist and sustainably oriented programs. It's still a very tiny slice, but there's no question that it has improved dramatically. And the kinds of folks that we met with in Washington, they might have been the exception to the rule, but almost to a person. They were enthusiastic, they were advocates, they were people who were working with whatever resources they had to try to be allies to BALLE-type people and ASBC-type people to really build a better food system that works better for farmers, that works better for eaters, and works better for the environment. So they're there at USDA. The Obama administration and Secretary Vilsack, through the Know Your Food, Know Your Farm program, has certainly increased attention to these localist and sustainability initiatives, and to a small degree, they've increased resources as well. Sometimes I feel like it's the left hand and the right hand analogy. You've got one part of USDA that's doing things that help us, and there's other parts that are promoting GMO crops. They're promoting so more lax regulations in chicken factories. I mean, so it's by no means a terrific scenario, but it is certainly much better than it was. There are clearly, honest to goodness, allies and advocates in the mix, and what we need to do is keep demonstrating that these things work, that these local sustainable food and farming initiatives not only create markets for farmers, not only help communities of all sorts and all class of folks to have better access to food, but they create more jobs per dollar spent than the kind of export-oriented big ag. So we've been saying that for a while. We've got more evidence now to back that up. We need to just keep at it, and maybe in another 20 years, we'll be dealing with a level playing field.
There are some people for whom, on its face, a sort of federal role in promoting localist economic development or localist community development type initiatives might seem a little bit paradoxical. How would you answer that, or how would you describe what you think the appropriate role of federal government structure is in encouraging or nurturing that sort of localist community development?
Well, I think in some cases, local food and farm advocates are asking the federal government to back off rather than get more involved. A good example is the recent comment period during which the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, was writing regulations, rules, basically, not regulations, for implementation of the Food Safety Modernization Act, which was passed in 2010. And the FDA came up with a set of rules that were really pretty onerous and unnecessary. Many of us thought not really science-based or risk-based, that would have made it much more difficult for small farmers, for organic farmers, for folks in farmers markets or CSAs. And so thousands and thousands and thousands, not only of farmers, but of locavores and people who care about their food, wrote the FDA, and it appears, we haven't seen the final rule, but it appears from what we've heard that the FDA heard them and is going to be backing off and writing rules that are scale appropriate, that wouldn't put a small farmer out of business unnecessarily. So sometimes the localist movement and the sustainability movement is asking the feds to back off. But ultimately, you've got to remember that it's not so much that we're looking for help from the federal government. We're looking for a level playing field. Right now, the big boys get a tremendous amount of help from the federal government. Large farmers and agribusiness get subsidized to a degree that is so far beyond anything that small farmers and sustainable producers get, that we're just looking for a little bit of parity. And we've also got to recognize that many communities a few generations ago had the infrastructure for a more self-reliant local food system. They had canneries, they had processing centers for meats, they had local markets, and much of that has gone away, not just because of market forces, but because of public policy, because of government incentives and rules and regulations, which have consistently favored big international corporations. A lot of what the local food movement is doing is trying to simply rebuild that local capacity, the physical infrastructure, the markets, the connections between producers and consumers, and the kind of training and education capacity that was there a few generations ago. So really we're talking about rebuilding that local capacity and level the playing field between local and sustainable on the one hand and big multinational on the other.
Was there anything specific that you learned about or that you learned at this meeting that you will take back to your community and which will influence your work back home?
Well, certainly the climate change hubs. I'm going to be trying to follow that very closely. In our case for the Southeast, it's going to be based in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is about 5 hours from where I live, but I think that there's a lot of activity in Western North Carolina, Southwest Virginia, East Tennessee, and other states around here around sustainability. And as I learn more about that, I'm hoping to link that regional hub to this rich array of sustainable farming and local foods initiatives in our area, both for support but also to inform their process there. So that's one thing for sure that I'll do. The other is I'm going to be working very hard to get our local food advocates, and by them I mean not only the farmers again, but the people who love to come to the market and shop and find good food, or love to go to the local grocery store and find good food, and to really encourage them to write our legislators to say there were some pretty good programs in this last farm bill, now they need to be funded, because we know without a doubt that a lot of those programs that got funding are going to be on the chopping block. And that's happened in the past, it'll happen now, and we're going to be working hard to see to it that they don't. You know, if you eliminated every one of these programs I've mentioned that support farmers markets and beginning farmers and socially disadvantaged farmers and food stamps at the market and healthy eating, and if you added all of them up and you just eliminated them, you zeroed them out of the federal budget, you still wouldn't save as much money as if you simply cut out subsidies for big corn farmers. So if people want to deal with the budget deficit, they shouldn't be going after the smallest, most effective, and most innovative programs. They should go after the big, bloated ones. And that's the message that I'll be continuing to take to folks around here.
You ran for the House of Representatives in 2012.
I did. I won the Democratic nomination. There was 3 candidates, and I won the Democratic nomination. I did not win the seat, but I gave it a good fight. And I ran on kind of a localist platform. I talked about the bottom-up economy instead of trickle-down economics, and got a lot of support from not just the few liberals in our district, but from working folks and coal miners and farmers and others.
Do you think you'll run again?
I don't know. I will say that I'm going to stay involved in the political process. I have been trying to do that since the election. I've been helped to start a group of young people that now are working hard. In fact, they just spent a day at the Virginia General Assembly dealing with state politics. This group called Rural Youth for Progressive Action is a delightful group of young people, nonpartisan, but working hard on sustainability and food and economic issues. And I'm also working with folks across the Appalachian region to try to figure out how to build the next economy in our region that has been relatively dependent on coal for a long time, and coal has been in decline for quite some time, and we're all trying to figure out what mix of manufacturing and new businesses could build a stronger, better economy going forward, and that has a lot of political dimensions. BALLE fellows are also, there's no formal program, but a number of the fellows that are part of the group I was in are very interested in and beginning to work on questions of public policy. So it's a kind of a new thing for a lot of folks. Most of us who've been in the trenches for many years, working on local economy or sustainable farming or whatever the issues have not been very political, we just really focused on our particular town or community or region and had some pretty good success with it. My reason for running for Congress and my goal since running has been to connect those effective new or emerging economy initiatives that are all over the country with the kinds of civic engagement from average people and public policy that would sustain them. You can only go so far building a good, healthy local economy before you run into the rules of the game, and the rules of the game are public policy. It's what the local, state, and federal legislators say you can and can't do, and it's the winners and losers that are chosen in those policies. So we've kind of neglected that as a movement, and I think whether I run again or not, I'm going to stay involved in trying to impact the rules, and especially to get, I hope, thousands, if not millions, of ordinary folks really, really excited about working to change those rules, to change policy.
I'll tell you what, Anthony, you deflected that question like a true politician. So I think you're the man for the job.
Oh gosh, I don't know. Are you insulting me, Andrew?
Not at all. That's the highest compliment. Our guest today has been 2011-2012 BALLE Fellow Anthony Flaccavento. He's an organic farmer, founder of SCALE, Sequestering Carbon, Accelerating Local Economies. Thanks a lot for joining us, Anthony.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be on, Andrew.